All right.
Hey,
Hey, Pierre. How's it going?
doing well. How are you?
Good, good. These invitations are getting a lot more seamless, I
Yeah,
find.
they are. This is good.
Yeah,
How's your Saturday going so far?
pretty good. Yeah, I've just been going hard from this morning on. So, how about yourself?
I'm doing all right. It's
Good, good.
been a mix of a couple hours of work, and then the rest has been kind of downtime. So I had a chance to get a workout in and cook some cook some food and come on here.
Sounds great. It sounds like
Yeah,
a
man.
pretty good Saturday, I'd say.
So far,
Um,
so good.
yeah, yeah. No, that's awesome. So, fatherhood, kind of the theme. At least I've focused on it all week as well.
I
To
saw it.
tee up, yeah, wanted to tee up this conversation, but it's something that you had suggested, Pierre. It's something that you're passionate about, and you've worked in this field a little bit, helping men navigate the challenges that could come from fatherhood. So maybe do you mind sharing why it's such a an area that are passionate about and interested in?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's an important part of many men's lives, but in a lot of ways for me, it's what drew my attention to working with men and really to working with men at big pivotal moments in life. And that started with a very, very small sliver of my work, which was around
Mm-hmm.
helping moms and getting involved with really helping moms who were admitted to the general hospital and getting to work with a few perinatal mental health professionals, and then getting involved in some of the academic and practical ways to reach parents. And specifically, initially, that was reaching moms. But for me, I had a really kind of a latent interest in helping men.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed there was a budding area of research and practice around helping men, but that it was painfully slow and painfully limited. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
services available for moms are fairly limited within the mental health realm, but the ones available for dads were in many places non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
And and often the work that I was doing with men, even before that, had a big element of how a man saw his own identity evolve over the course of his life. And a lot of that tended to deal with matters of fatherhood. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the area that I was seeing that most was actually in the palliative care realm, where at the end of life there were often regrets or judgments or reconceptualizations of a man's life based on family and based on his role as a father. And often that created a tremendous amount of distress, and many of the men um, did not have really solid engagements with their kids. And so it became a noticeable area of struggle for men.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sort of seeing the experience of fatherhood across the the lifespan or the span of engagement. And I think one of the things that struck me was fathers have um, though the experience of fatherhood is largely overwhelmingly positive, fathers also face a tremendous amount of um, interpersonal and psychological strain early on in the experience of fatherhood, especially, and increasingly, um, many men want to, and I think increasingly many men want to ensure that the longevity and positivity of their role as a father is consistent, and many men are struggling to do that. I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that had to do with um, norms and expectations around masculinity and around fatherhood and being in the home, which many of which are changing. And also a lot of that had to do and has to do with modeling. And it sort of became personal for me. I'm not a father, but I am a son. And I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the areas we'll talk about forms how we see the role of fatherhood later in life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that, in essence, it became kind of this great opportunity to help men to re-establish and re-identify meaning and value in their lives. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in many cases, it's been a really great opportunity for guys to define their mission and work towards that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been fortunate enough to have a couple guys from the UK come on my podcast,
Hmm.
Mark Williams and Scott Mayer, who are doing tremendous work there uh, around awareness in this space, especially with fathers that are kind of dealing with newborns that are first-time fathers early on. There's a lot of mental health issues around that, obviously, that we don't really talk about.
Yeah.
And to your point, it's becoming more and more um, common now to bring that to awareness and have those discussions, but definitely an area that needs interest. I guess for you, one of the questions I would ask is, do you often feel internally that, like, how can I offer something in this space when I'm not a father? Like, do you get this
Yeah.
uh, kind of, and how do you deal with that? Like, I think personally, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I think, you probably bring a different perspective that many of us, like as fathers, wouldn't necessarily have. And there's tons of value in that. But how do you navigate that when it comes to yourself trying to offer advice to fathers, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's one that I wrote about not too long ago,
Mm-hmm.
but it has been one that has at various occasions held me back or felt like it's held me back. And, I think a big chunk of that has been something that I've navigated personally, internally, without talking very much through. I think I wasn't at the beginning of my work in building Braver Man and really thinking about how I wanted to work with men and engage men in discussions, and people of all genders in discussions around men's mental health. I sort of shied away from the topic of fatherhood, in part because I felt sort of internally self-critical.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think the ways in which I now recognize value are that I have a really strong passion and interest in helping men to engage as men across areas of their lives, including the way that they show up to their families, and so maintaining this emphasis on fatherhood doesn't necessarily require me to have personal experience. And I think one of the things that I have grown to appreciate over the last few years in doing this work is that my lack of personal experience means that I can stay really curious to the individual experiences of any given man. And I don't make
Mm-hmm.
assumptions just based on my own experience in early fatherhood. And then I notice that I think a lot when I work with physicians because I
Mm-hmm.
can relate to the experience uh, of many physicians in training and practice, that sometimes I will jump to a conclusion that we have a shared experience in their own process of navigating some aspect that I might have struggled with. And I noticed that that actually, in some ways, creates connection, but in some ways reduces my innate curiosity. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I jump the gun and jump to conclusions that may not be right. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
find that I do that with fathers. And so in
Right.
many ways, actually, I found that not being a father has allowed me to stay really curious of the individual experience of each given man, not jump to a conclusion about my own natural experience, and not jump too heavily into advice giving that might just
Mm-hmm.
be based on my own experience. The
Right.
other thing is, like this has never been a thing for me in other realms of the work that I do. Like I, treated a lot of my work was in palliative medicine. Many uh, of the patients with whom I was working before had transplantations and organ failure and cancer and all kinds of conditions that I've never faced myself, but I've
Mm-hmm.
never had this experience of telling myself I'm not prepared or I'm not in a position to help this person because I've
Mm-hmm.
never experienced the exact experience that they have. I've always
Mm-hmm.
just taken the knowledge and experience that I do have, but more importantly, the passion and interest that I've got in helping each individual to then help determine how I can help that person, in this case, that father,
Mm-hmm.
define wellness, whether that's sort of mental wellness or physical or spiritual or however he may define that in his own right, in his own realm,
Yeah.
without sort of having to use my own personal experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
for you, it kind of gives you an objective view, and then you're probably also not subject to any biases that other people may be experiencing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that's great. I know you had some questions. Do you want
I
to
do
like?
have some questions.
All right,
Well,
let's go for
I'm
it.
curious about what this week's experience of delving into fatherhood has meant for you as a dad, and also as
Um,
a man who works with men, many of whom may be fathers as well.
yeah. I think the biggest piece um, I wanted to identify, and I think is huge, and what I'm passionate about is it's twofold, right? So there's this, and it was covered in my podcast with Kurt Storing that I released on Thursday. We talked about how we all have uh, childhood wounds that keep showing up in our behaviors, right? And often when we haven't dealt with those or we haven't done the healing, we're projecting it out onto people around us, and often, our children are at the brunt of that, and we often don't even recognize it.
Mhm.
And so that's one part of it. The other part is we often are very critical about how our parents raised us, right? Like we even going through that journey of childhood and adolescence, especially when the friction point is the highest, we are very critical and question a lot of the things our parents do or decisions they make on our behalf. And and then we become parents and we do the exact same thing to our children. So
Mhm.
where do you do that healing? And I think until you don't sit there and reflect, you don't really have that compassion for your own parents, recognizing that, hey, they were doing the best they could at the time with the tools they had and the knowledge they had. And I'm doing the exact same thing. So for me, it's a bit twofold. And the experience this week, to answer your question, I think is really to bring awareness around A, how important our own healing is for those reasons. And then B, I think there's not a lot of resources to your point, right? So how can we, I mean, we could wait for resources, or how can we, within this community we have and the people we talk to, how can we bring that awareness and start that conversation? And things like what we're doing right now by having this conversation. How do we get more people to open up and share their experiences, and even ask for support when they need it? So that's, I think, kind of in a nutshell what I've tried to do this week.
Beautiful. It, we're in many ways around mental health care relative to several other parts of the world. We're in being in North America, there's a lot of access to mental health services relative to services across the world. One of the areas where I think we see the bulk of research and public health services and also clinical services for parents, though, is really not here. I
Mm-hmm.
think we're sort of slow to take that up, and
Yeah.
perhaps also we can argue slow to take up, especially in the U.S., the matter of parental leave
Mm-hmm.
and other matters related to advocacy for parents. And so a lot of that has been spearheaded by the UK and Ireland and Australia and New Zealand. And so the work that I've done historically around presenting on topics related to perinatal mental health has been not in the US and not in Canada. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of that, I mean, it's given me some fortunate opportunities to travel down under, and that's been really wonderful. But it's also highlighted how few services are available everywhere, I think,
Right.
really, but also how much work there is to be done in this part of the world
Mm-hmm.
around helping both moms and dads, but also particularly fathers.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge thing in North America. I mean, in Canada, I can speak like, there's not really, I mean, the leaves are pretty good.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of pressure if you were to
Relatively.
take
Yeah.
a parental leave, but there's not a lot in terms of conversations, and you kind of your child's born, and then you get some support from the healthcare system, but after that, you're on your own, right? And I mean, that's just the nature of it, but we could probably dive into that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess
Yeah. I'll go
I
ahead and
know you
start us
wanted to
out on
cover
these
some
questions.
material, so yeah,
Yeah.
go for it. Yeah.
Very good. So we've curated a few questions, and so we'll try to touch upon the bulk of them, but I think it's important to dig into several ones. And so if we don't get to all of them, I think there will be other fora for discussing them. But the first is, what are the mindset and mental health challenges that tend to emerge for men during the period of early fatherhood? And
Mm-hmm.
and I think this is one to which certainly we both can speak, but I'm curious about what you've seen on your end, whether that's professionally or personally, if you feel comfortable sharing that,
Mm-hmm.
the challenges that might emerge for men at that transition point of early fatherhood.
Well, I can speak personally for sure, and I feel like a lot of people kind of share the same sentiment. Like it's just something you can never really truly prepare for, right?
Yeah,
And the analogy I use is, it's probably, I mean, I don't mean to say that it's a job, but it is a huge responsibility
sure.
becoming a parent, for that matter. And it's not like any other career that you could quit, retire, just even go to a different department and not have to worry about it. It's you're responsible for this person for the rest of your life in a way, right? Even when
Yeah,
they're older. And you're never really prepared for it. Like there's no training, there's no schooling on it. Every child is different. Like even if you have more than one, like you may have figured a pattern for the first one, but then the second one might be completely different.
yeah,
So it's just one of those things that you can never really prepare for. And I mean, there's obviously, like for me, I still remember the day my son was born. It's probably like the best day of my life. And you know, there's that initial feeling like you're like, oh wow, like it's almost like you're being born into a different life because, you know, now you have a different name. Like someone's going to call you dad,
Yeah.
right? And you have a completely different responsibility now. It's like you know, your entire life up to that point, you've been an independent individual. Maybe you've had relationships where, you know, you potentially have to take care of someone or your parents, but this is completely different. You have a life that depends on you. So I think that from that perspective,
Yeah.
that's where I think a lot of the challenge comes because there's things coming at you so fast. And, you know, even when you're home, I remember like there was a period where my son cried every night for a week for 3 hours. And as a new parent, you kind of go through the troubleshooting list, right? It's like, okay, do I hold him? Do I feed him? You kind of go through that, you exhaust everything, and now you're out of options, right? And especially when babies are colicky, it's like at one point you just have to sit there and wait for them to stop crying because you've tried everything. Um,
Yeah. Hmm. So
yeah, sorry.
no, you were,
Sorry, there was a bit of a network issue, but yeah. So,
oh
anyways,
yeah.
so I think in a long-winded answer, I think that, you know, you can potentially have a mindset around it. You could feel prepared, but then everything goes out the window, right? And I think that's where, personally, I think that's where a lot of the challenges come in.
Yeah, I think that's been a big area of focus. I mean, the kind of the pain points or the challenging points around transitions to fatherhood have often been, at least within the realm of mental health and psychological research, have been sort of um, parsed out into phases, the kind of pregnancy and antenatal phase, the actual delivery, which I think there is a
Mm-hmm.
tremendous amount of um, potential to identify challenges, especially around traumatic deliveries
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't entirely been tapped into research for fathers, and that can speak, I think, also to the the fears and experiences antenatally with the potential for miscarriage and other sort of
Mm-hmm.
childhood conditions. But a lot of it has had to do with the role transition and just what it means to be a good father, to show up as a good father, how you identify that yourself, um, and then how you actualize it. And I think
Mm-hmm.
a big part of that, at least a lot of the literature has um, supported the value of even just having one person uh, available to you who may have experienced fatherhood before and is ensuring that you're attended to, which I think is really uncommon for dads. I
Mm-hmm.
see even in the experience of having navigated the obstetric space and the pre the sort of perinatal space, there's not, and the sort of early pediatric space, there's not really a
Mm-hmm.
lot of emphasis on screening for, you know, even asking about how dad's doing. And I think
Yeah.
that also translates into the sort of socially into the home and into the community. There is a
Mm-hmm.
lot of emphasis on how mom's doing, the transition to mom. But I'm curious, how did you find that experience in the hospital, among family or among community? Do you feel like there was as much of a focus on you and the experience that you've had as forgone?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's
Another
okay.
network issue.
Are we hitting a
Yeah.
network issue? Is it my end or
I don't know, to be honest. It could be me, but so yes, sorry, you were asking
okay?
about that transition piece and how I felt, whether around support and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I lost
Yeah.
you
Or
there for a
what
bit, but
helped you and what might
yes.
have gotten in the way? Yeah.
To be honest, I feel like I mean, this is just my perspective, but I feel like, yeah, I mean, I felt supported, especially and with the healthcare system. You know, the nurses were
Yeah,
great that we had for 2, 3 days. They took care of everything. But I think it's one of those things you have to rip the band-aid off, right? Like ultimately, this is your child, and you're gonna go home, and yeah, family can be around, but you're only delaying that experience because ultimately, you know, I mean, yeah, I've heard stories where family members are great. Like, you know, I had good support as well, but how long does that last, right? Maybe a month, 2 months, but after that, you're still having to confront it, right?
yeah,
And I think, so. I mean, to answer your question, yes, there's tremendous support, but it's one of those things like everyone goes through it too, right? So
yeah,
it's hard to say like, you know, I can't really expect people to jump in because like, you know, my family's gone through it, my parents went through it, right? And they
yeah,
probably didn't have the same amount of support that I did. So I think one of the other things I did, or a couple of things I wanted to mention around mental health challenges, while we were talking, I recalled I'm reading a book. It's a Malcolm Gladwell book, and he talks about, it's a bit of a tangent, but I'll get back to the point here. But he talks about how during torturing, a lot of these CIA agents would disrupt their captives' sleep. And within a week, these captives would start cooperating. So the reason why I bring that up is because I think the sleep disruption is so significant. And again, everyone's experience varies, but for most
yeah,
people, you know, if your child's waking up in the middle of the night, there's no like set timetable. They'll wake up whenever they're hungry or something's happening. And I think the impact of sleep is very underestimated for when you're, you know, again, when you bring a baby home. And I
yeah,
remember the first 2 weeks, I was walking around like a zombie. Like, I don't know how I was functioning. Like, even to drive, I thought, you know, there's a huge risk there because I felt like a zombie because I wasn't getting proper sleep, you know?
yeah,
So I think those things are undermined. And then I also don't want to undervalue any experience that women go through because they obviously go through a tremendous amount of challenges with childbirth and everything. But I think the other aspect that I spoke with Mark Williams on is if your partner is going through postpartum depression, so now you're also having to take that on. And so, what do you do in those situations?
yeah. That's a huge one. And so this is an area that has really blossomed in terms of research and understanding. But if your partner experiences postpartum depression, the risk for you as a father goes up really
Mm-hmm.
dramatically. And
Mm-hmm.
it's super challenging because there has been some literature to support the the benefit of dad not having depression when mom does, and that benefit obviously and the challenge that emerges for both parents but also for the kid, um, that becomes uh, even more challenging acutely when both sets of parents are depressed. And so when mom's depressed, the likelihood of dad being depressed is somewhere between 1 in 2 and 1 in 4, which
Mm-hmm.
is quite dramatic. And I think
Yeah.
many of the
Yeah.
programs that are available to help moms through postnatal depression have factored that into the equation. That if the attention is just focused on helping mom, sure, that may diminish dad's risk by proxy, but it's not entirely clear how much so. And so if dad's being
Mm-hmm.
ignored in the process, then also that creates a dynamic within the family that potentially could have been prevented. And so the
Yeah.
importance of acknowledging when either parent is experiencing postnatal depression becomes super important and really timely for the kid,
Yeah.
because there are some longer term effects of having both parents experience depression. And I
Hmm.
think there's a mention here of both
Yeah.
parents. So working through parenting can be really difficult at times. It's helpful, I
Yeah.
think, for kind of getting the entire family on the same page. I mean, often I think one of the challenging element, I mean, this may be true of men's mental health in general, but it's really true of thinking about fatherhood, um, that this isn't a zero sum game.
Hmm.
If you're focusing your attention and awareness on helping dad, there certainly isn't, nor should there be, a lessening of intention to help mom. And in fact, helping each parent, regardless of the parental situation, regardless of the relationship uh, status of the parents, ultimately is beneficial to each and beneficial to the family unit. And so
Hmm.
I think there's a growing body of evidence to support the need to focus on both parents when one of them is experiencing depression in the
Hmm.
perinatal period. The
Yeah.
challenge is
Yeah.
just, I mean, the challenge is just like there are so many barriers to getting mental health care service, period. And
Hmm.
um, and so how do we help to identify parents who may be at risk? How do we normalize the conversation around it so that it doesn't necessarily require someone to have to go out of their way to even learn that postnatal depression is a thing
Hmm.
in fathers? Um, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, that may guide us into our next big question, which is how do we even change the discussion around paternal mental health for men?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully through having conversations like this and
Yeah,
some of the other stuff that you and I are doing, I think, to your point, the compounding effect is so significant, right? So, especially if your partner's got depression, you're not getting sleep. It's not like you can go seek help because you've got a baby that you're responsible for, right?
yeah,
Like you really don't have anything in your life at that point that could even set you up for success or dealing with it, right? So I think having conversations like this and, even like some of the questions you've had is how can we improve that? How can we support new fathers or just, fathers in general? I think, yeah, I think it's just having these conversations and having a community where we can create that platform.
yeah,
I really, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things I really struggle with. And I know a lot of people are doing work in bringing awareness and having resources and tools available for new parents. And I think that's moving in the right direction, but sometimes it's hard. Like, I think there's an aspect of, and I know your next question was around a psychological standpoint. As a new parent, there's a lot of pressure. Like, you don't want to kind of assume or accept failure, right? It's like, well, everyone's done it, and then there's the whole imposter syndrome that comes with it too. That am I even equipped to be able to do this?
yeah. I think that I think someone mentioned that early on, the sort of feeling of inferiority or the imposter syndrome. And I think often this is where dads connecting to one another is so valuable. In the same way
Hmm.
that men connecting to one another around other important life events and perhaps challenges normalizes the discussion of something that may feel vulnerable or feel diminishing in some way. And
Yeah.
and a tremendous amount of the work, I say tremendous, but it's a tiny amount of work, really, in absolute terms. Um, but a large amount of the work that's been done within the clinical setting has involved getting men together, getting dads together, essentially dad group, and a lot of that has also included the baby, both for moms and dads, because
Mm-hmm.
there are all sorts of challenges to, really appreciating um, the availability of individual time when you're caring for another human. Um, Part of the
Yeah.
connection between fathers, I think, clearly has to be done individually, one on one, without the baby. But also, a big part of it is appreciating what's the normal experience for men in navigating early fatherhood. That there are some aspects of early fatherhood that prior generations will not have gotten involved in. Changing diapers,
Correct.
playing, feeding. In essence, in most settings, doing everything but breastfeeding. Everything that
Mm-hmm.
the mom does but breastfeed is, in
Yeah.
essence, what is recommended around engaging with the baby. And there can still be stigmas or just a lack of awareness around and familiarity around men getting so directly involved in care that is lessened when you're seeing other men engage
Mm-hmm.
in a father baby group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I appreciate the comment here too, like, bringing in a child, it
Yeah.
can be overwhelming. And, I think that's where a lot of couples struggle too, is
Big time.
again, it's like this whole curveball coming at you. And, even though, a child's a blessing, it's still, how do you figure it out? And, like, how do you do that teamwork? And I think a lot of couples suffer from that, especially early on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I wonder, targeting, because we've talked a little bit about how we help fathers best, how we change the discussion around fatherhood for men. But um, and there's a little bit of an allusion to this earlier, but how do we take from our own experiences as sons to guide us later in life in caring for others? And I mean that in particular for fathers, but I think too, there's a lesson here for us to consider, any of us as men who, uh, regardless of relationship we may have had with our or have with our fathers, what do we take personally to help guide us? I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one.
Well, Um, I mean, again, I have a view on it, and people may not agree with it, but I think for me, going through certain life experiences and also being a father and kind of seeing how difficult it is, but how much patience it requires, and I still make mistakes. Even I mean, I'm not an expert in fatherhood. I make mistakes all the time, but it's being able to give myself some compassion and grace. And we've talked about this in previous lives as well. But at the same time, when you start having that level of compassion for yourself, you also start, by extension, having that same level of compassion for your parents.
Yeah.
And I've had to go and repair a huge uh, portion of my relationship with my dad for various reasons, but that didn't happen or wouldn't have happened unless I would have done my own healing. And that's something I alluded to earlier, is okay, I've carried these childhood wounds, and yes, 99% of them were not my fault, but it is my responsibility to do that healing now so
Mhm.
I can be a better man, or be a better father, and not pass that generational trauma onto my child, because then he's going to have the same. So I can break that chain, but fully also like knowing that he's going to have his own challenges and struggles that he's going to have to deal with, but at least I can do my part in that. And that's forced me to have very open and, like having forgiving conversations with my dad. And, yeah, I think that's been helpful for me. I don't know if that answers your question entirely, but I think having that level of grace for ourselves can also, because one of the things I struggled early on with fatherhood was guilt, and I touched on imposter syndrome, and it was almost like it's like in Marvel movies where the the person realizes he's got this superpower, right? Like it's like the
Yeah.
first time Spider-Man realizes he's got this superpower, and now he's got this huge responsibility to the world. But then with great power comes great responsibility. So that's how I look at becoming a father. It's like, okay, well, what can I do with myself and role model these things for my son, and then getting past that feeling of guilt over time, which I still struggle with, is okay, I'm still doing my best. I don't have a manual on how to be a father, so I'm going to make mistakes, but being open with those mistakes and being also being able to apologize to my son when I do notice those things. So those are some things that I've applied, and like I said, because of having that mindset, I've been able to extend that to my own parents.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I I think that's probably at least the experience of growing up and recognizing that you are that I am not as uh, self-aware as I would have tried to judge or expect my own father to be. He struggled in his own ways, and I think
Yes.
part of that was his own lack of fatherhood. His father died when he was quite young. He was maybe 4, and so
Hmm.
I think certainly not the entire root of challenges that he's faced throughout his life, but it's growing up and recognizing I don't have it all figured out has also helped me to appreciate, well, he was just sort of trying to figure it out too when I
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
really young. And I mean, in retrospect, he was also 26, and so uh, nearly half of my age now. And so I feel like it gives me a little bit of humility for and and uh, compassion for his own
Hmm.
experience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I think that's been my biggest, I think, mindset shift when I started looking at it that way, right? And
yeah,
and I mean, and then I think I also started looking at the pressures that my parents had, which were far more significant than anything I've experienced, and like my parents had to immigrate to a new country, learn a new language, and then bring kids into the world. So, I mean, they had a lot to deal with, right? They were
yep,
starting from zero, from everything, even financially, right? So,
yeah,
we often take that for granted, and just having that mindset shift allowed me to just have more compassion, to your point.
yeah. Same here, same here. Yeah, and so just aware of time, I suppose. Maybe final thoughts on how we keep the conversation going and encourage the conversation to happen outside of us, even to help fathers best.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been doing, and I've shared this with you, Pierre, offline, is I've a friend and I have started a men's group here where I live
Yeah,
in Calgary, and we've found it powerful. Like, I mean, the men that come, not all of them are dads, but I think a lot of the conversations we have, whether you're a father or not, I think you're being able to bring to the table some of the challenges you encounter in your daily life, and some of that could be as a father, or it could be as a partner, or just a man in society trying to figure it out. So I would encourage anyone who either has a passion for this like we do, or is looking for a community, try to set something up. It doesn't have to be big. With technology now, whatever we've experienced during this pandemic, is it's fairly easy to be able to even connect remotely. So if you've got friends in different cities, or in different neighborhoods, or even some guys you play sports with or whatever. There's tons and tons of ways to be able to connect and support each other. So I would highly encourage men who want to do that, or try to seek it out, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening as well. So I think the more we have these conversations, the more awareness we gain and the more we can support each other. And, I think there's people like yourself, Pierre, who are doing great work. So I would encourage people to even reach out to you, to kind of seek
Thank you.
resources and support. So I think that would be my call to action based on everything we've discussed. I think, one of the most powerful things is when, and I experienced this yesterday, I was kind of being vulnerable about my situation of, being a single dad and getting limited time with my son. And I met an ex-colleague of mine, and I would have never imagined this guy opening up, but he just opened up about his own experience of going through something similar when he was a child and his parents were going through a divorce. So there's the reason why I bring that up is there's power in just speaking and having that platform, whether it's in a room or in a Zoom meeting. I think a lot of people also then feel empowered by one person's vulnerability. So there's tons of power in that. So I would highly encourage that.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. I think that's most excellent. The um, the power of just speaking about our own experiences and normalizing even the conversation around what is happening individually, personally to you as a father, um, shifts the conversation, I think, between and among men, so
Mm-hmm.
that there is an acknowledgement of the importance of this big role transition in one's life. But I'd say even for men who aren't fathers and, um, you know, doesn't, and this is true of everyone, doesn't have to be men, just being able to engage, being able to ask uh, questions of dad around how he may be doing, what
Mm-hmm.
challenges he might be facing, um, what wins he might be facing, and the
Mm-hmm.
experience of. And I think within the medical community,
Yeah.
engaging both mom and dad, the family at large, parents, however they look, um, both parents, all parents really, because there are
Mm-hmm.
so many stakeholders and there can be multiple sets of folks who take on parenting roles and of all backgrounds and genders. And so, really important. And doing that on the regular doesn't take a lot of time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the one takeaway I would
Yeah.
offer, especially for people who are engaging with parents on the regular, or have opportunities to engage all sets of parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree 100%. I think there's even just, and often people aren't comfortable sharing whatever they're struggling with or asking for help, but just even checking in on people like that, I think there's a sense of comfort that
yeah,
they feel like, okay, there is someone who is curious. And if they ever feel like they can want to speak up, at least they know there's someone there who's willing to listen. So I think there's still power in that. And maybe even if you ask 3 or 4 times, how are you doing? Maybe by the fourth time, they might feel comfortable sharing or asking for help. So don't get discouraged if people don't like to share. Everyone kind of takes their own time and has their own process and level of comfort. So, but I do believe that there is power, and because as long as someone knows that someone's there, that in itself can be comforting. So I would continue to encourage that for anyone who's in this space or trying to have these conversations.
beautifully said. And
Yeah,
with that, we're
yeah.
at time.
Yeah, no, Pierre,
Yeah.
thank you for
Thank you.
suggesting this. I think it's very valuable. I do apologize about my internet, but
It might have been me.
um,
I hope
well,
it sounds like it's settled.
for now, I think, yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, thank you for doing this. I
of
appreciate
course, man.
some of the time and effort you put into this, and I appreciate the work you're doing in the community. Obviously, I think there's something to be said about for someone who hasn't gone through it but has so much passion. So, I admire you for doing that, and I'm excited for our next one. We'll have to figure
Yeah.
out a topic. Yeah.
Beautiful. Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Well,
coming.
thanks. Enjoy your Saturday, and thank you
Yeah,
for
you
everyone that
too.
joined in. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Okay. See
Bye.
ya.